You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. I love when I get recommendations from people, and the book is something that I probably never would have picked up because it wouldn't have fit necessarily into my worldview. And the person we're talking to today fits this description. Her book is it's bold, it's real, it's funny, it's honest. The book is called Warrior, My Path to Being Brave. Lisa Guerrero is the author, and she is our guest on the podcast. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your service, by the way.
Oh, thank you. That's very, very kind, especially we're recording this on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, we're honoring the country and everything that I want to say stands for, but everything that it's meant to people over the years. In 4 generations of my family, there are 17 veterans.
Wow.
I like to think that it runs in families, and we're very lucky. Your book, let me just say this. You did a hell of a lot more fighting in your career than I ever did in the United States Army.
Well, that's one way to put it. I will say this. People ask, since we're talking about the title of the book, Warrior, a lot of people say, how can you call yourself a warrior? Warriors are people who fought for our country. Warriors are people who put their lives on the line. Warrior is a very special word, and I do not take that word lightly at all. The reason why the book is called Warrior is my last name, Guerrero, means warrior in Spanish. So when I was very little, right before my mom died, I was 8, she was 29. She pulled me aside. She knew she was going to pass soon. And she wanted me to remember that my last name, Guerrero, meant warrior and that I was born to fight. So I think we can all be warriors in our circle of influence. We can all be warriors in our world with the weapons and with the armor that we choose to wear and we choose to fight with, and hopefully surrounded by people that you're fighting for. So I feel that I was blessed with that last name, Guerrero, and it's been something that has certainly been a word that I take seriously and I take great pride in.
Well, that would seem to be the people who maybe are being a little contrary towards you. That's too narrow of a definition in my view. My son did 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat infantryman. I certainly consider him a warrior. But my mother, who beat a form of Lou Gehrig's disease to learn to walk and work again, she was also in the Marine Corps. Both my parents were. She's a warrior. And reading your book, I'm surprised that are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
I'm surprised your right hand doesn't have calluses the size of California, considering the number of people you should have smacked.
Yeah, the book really does. And what I tried to do, Robert, is I wanted to have people that read it have an authentic experience about what it must have been like to be a female sports reporter in locker rooms in the 90s and, battling for your place in the world of broadcasting or of acting. And I name names in my book and I talk about specific things that happened, not to say, oh, look how great I am, because I also recount many of my mistakes. But I wanted people to have an authentic peek behind the curtain of the media, of sportscasting, of acting, and see one woman's journey into that space over 4 decades.
Your book details as much as any biography I've read of a living or current celebrity or historical figure, the highs and the lows. I had to suffer through some of your, not suffer, that's not the right word. I had to surmise through some of your chapter titles. Oh God, this is going to be a bad chapter. Oh, this chapter's great. Oh, this chapter's bad. I should note that Lisa, if I may call you Lisa,
Of course.
as a latest chapter, just last year, she got married again and she has a rock on her finger that I think I could fry eggs on. And I'm just based on all of your stories, I'm very happy for your nuptials last year.
Thank you. And I married somebody who is also an amazing hero. He was in the Air Force Academy and um, he served our country in the Air Force and he was a fighter pilot. And we're very proud of him. And I was very blessed to meet him later in life. Yeah, he gets a shout out at the end because I actually met him after I wrote the book, but before we published it. So in the acknowledgments at the end, I was able, because I just knew he was going to be my husband. And so I was able to do a shout out to him.
Not only does he get a shout out, but he gets XO in capital letters. So he must really got it going on.
He does. He's a good guy.
There's a book recommendation I'd like to make for him that I'll make after we're finished with the podcast that I just finished and recorded a podcast on that I think he would really, really enjoy. But
great.
Sports.
Yes.
I was born in 67. I won't say when you were born.
64. It's okay. I'm very open about my age.
April 9th, 1964. You came of age when I'd say that women in sports broadcasting was certainly in its embryonic stage. I've acknowledged on this podcast to people like Jackie McMullen, who was awesome, and others, my caveman tendencies when it comes to women in sports. They're a lot, of course, not as pronounced as they used to be, but you really came. I'm not going to say you were born 10 years too soon, but the fact you were born in the mid 60s, came of age in the late 70s, 80s, 90s professionally. There was no magic word. There was no vehicle for you to do some of the things you've done. And it's surprising to me that you didn't give up. And I suppose that's why the title of your book is what it is. But growing up when you did, tell me a little bit about sports, how you got into sports broadcasting, and the insurmountable, almost, obstacles you faced. Because all I remember is Phyllis George and
Jackie Kennedy, maybe? Or what's her name?
Jane Kennedy.
Jane Kennedy.
That's what I was trying to think of. Please go ahead.
You know, it was interesting. My dad for father, I have a podcast called Lisa Guerrero Unleashed, and I interviewed my dad for Father's Day. And we were talking, and I have never interviewed my dad on camera. So it was really an interesting and very personal and emotional conversation. But one of the things we were talking about is that when my mom died, my dad, who was a young man himself at the time, suddenly has these two little kids that he's raising alone, thousands of miles away from family of his own. And so the first thing he did was plop me into sports. At the same time, he put me in grief theater therapy, children's therapy, to get over the trauma of losing my mom at 8 years old. So these two tracks of putting me in theater therapy and putting me in sports was an incredible combination for me because I learned the competitive spirit of sports. I learned the language of sports that I shared with my dad because my brother wasn't into sports, but I was. And my dad really encouraged me in sports, and I was an athlete. And he said something in my podcast to me that he'd never told me before because I was on Bobby Sox and I was in the All-Stars. I was a pitcher and a first baseman. And he said, Lisa, if you were born later, you would have been a professional softball player. That's how good you were as an athlete, but you were born too soon. You were just on the cusp of women's sports being a thing and Title IX, et cetera. The way I saw it when I was little, my dad told me I could be anything. And so I took that seriously. By anything, I wanted to be the quarterback of the San Diego Chargers. because we lived in San Diego at the time. And I loved Dan Fouts, Eric Coryell. I loved the colors. I was a Chargers fan. Also loved the Padres back when they were brown and gold and had the friar on the front. 70s. So I loved sports, but I really wanted to be a quarterback. And my dad said, okay, well, you better practice. Let's get out in the backyard. He taught me how to throw a perfect spiral. We would go through baseball cards. We would go through the football stats every week. Every Sunday, we'd go through the Sunday sports page. We'd watch all the NFL games together. And at parties, he would trot me out and he'd say, Lisa, name all the NFC quarterbacks. Lisa, what coach is on the hot seat this week? Lisa, he would quiz me about sports. And I realized, wait a minute, I have something special and different than other girls my age. I know this secret language that my dad and I share. And apparently, a lot of girls don't know this stuff. And so I just realized pretty quickly that sports was going to be a vehicle for me to be able to have friends. And not only on the teams that I was on, but being able to speak this language of sports with the boys, because other girls my age didn't collect baseball cards, but I did. So it was fun for me to kind of discover that. And that began my lifelong love affair with all of sports, not just women's sports or men's, just sports. So as I got older, the reality hit that I'm not going to be the quarterback for the Chargers, but I could be an NFL cheerleader. And I decided I was going to try out for cheerleading at 19 for the Rams. And I became a rookie that year. I made it and I stayed on the squad for 4 years where I became a captain and then went on to direct teams with the Atlanta Falcon cheerleaders and the New England Patriots cheerleaders. So I spent 10 years in NFL entertainment before making the switch to sportscasting. But it was a great platform for me to learn to perform, to have the competition of auditions. I think a lot of people have been watching this show called America's Sweethearts on Netflix about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. And I think a lot of people that watch that have a newfound respect for cheerleaders. And, they're actually athletes and dancers who have studied for years to become these elite performers. And so I look back now with some pride at that time. I used to be told, don't ever talk about your cheerleader past. People won't take you seriously as a sports reporter if they know you were a cheerleader. That's, of course, a bunch of baloney. But, in the day, they did tell you that. Now I look back and I'm very proud of that experience. And my best friends today, 40 years later, are still those women that I cheered with for the Rams in the 80s. So I look back at that very lovingly. And I'm also in the NFL Cheerleader Hall of Fame now. I was inducted into the inaugural class 4 years ago. So I'm proud of that as well. So
You have a nice gold jacket?
you know what? They should have had our jackets gold. Instead, they made our jackets red with like a gold patch, but we should have had gold jackets too. I think it just should have been gold all the way across. The men wear the gold, the women wear the gold.
What's your favorite? One of my favorite parts of your book, you know, the personality of women is such a attractive aspect of the male sort of female dynamic. The fact that you knew sports, you knew more than the boys, you won these trivia contests, I can only imagine had just made you that much more attractive and that much more desirable on behalf of from men.
Your day moves fast. Your news should too. That's why there's a new and improved Wish TV app, bringing you more local news, breaking alerts, live streaming, weather forecast, radar, and Indiana sports, all in one place. Customize your news feed to see the stories that matter most to you and get the information you need when you need it. Download the new and improved Wish TV app today on iOS or Android and take News 8 with you everywhere.
Because that's the culture. Sometimes you like to be bested. And reading you talking about trivia contests or throwing off, doing questions back and forth with like the men you worked with, I wanted to ask, what is your favorite piece of sports trivia?
Huh. That is a really good question. I remember being in an elevator once and somebody gets into the elevator and they recognized me. And they were like, oh, I bet you can't name all of the Rams quarterbacks throughout history. And what was funny about that question was that I was asked that question years before, and I decided when I was about 17 or 18 years old that I was going to memorize all of the quarterbacks for the Rams. And so this was close enough to that time frame that I still remembered that answer. And I started rattling it off. Now, had he asked me, name every single starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But he asked me the team that I just happened to have memorized all these for a couple of years ago as like just something I thought I should know. And I used that for my auditions when I was a rookie. So I happened to know it. And I think this guy could have fainted walking out that elevator when the doors opened. I mean, I wish there was a hidden camera on that. This is pre-days of, when there was Ring cameras everywhere or cell phones. But that would have been the funniest video. That guy's face, he could not believe that I was able to rattle off those names. And to this day, I do get some people that will try to challenge me with sports and sports trivia. And because I'm so far removed now as a sports reporter, because I had this whole other half of my career as an investigative reporter that lasted 20 years, but I still love sports and I still like to try to remember some of that stuff. Also early in my career, and really what launched my career was a radio appearance in Boston at WEEI, which is an all sports radio station there. And this legend by the name of, what was his name? He kind of discovered me, Eddie Endelman. Eddie Endelman. He had me on his show to talk about Patriots cheerleader tryouts. And for one reason or another, we started to talk. He asked me something about, because he knew I was from Los Angeles originally. So we started talking about the Lakers-Celtics rivalry. And he couldn't believe I knew basketball. And then he couldn't believe that I knew BC football. And suddenly we're talking about sports. And people were calling in asking Eddie Endelman, are you telling her the answers? Is this a setup? And he goes, no, she looks like Raquel Welch, but she knows sports. And then he produced the very first sports show I was ever on TV on Sports Channel New England. And that launched my career. And that was, so you just never know where that sports knowledge would help. And the final thing I'll say about that is I do remember being a young model and actress and wanting to be a sports reporter. And I would go on these sets for commercials, and the crew's never, the cameramen and stuff, they don't care about the actors. They kind of roll their eyes with the talent. They don't care about that. They're sitting around either smoking back in the day or reading the sports paper, their sports pages. And I would walk over to them and say, hey, what was the score last night of this game or that? And so I bonded with all of my crews on all of my assignments because we talked about sports. So again, I just knew that the language of sports was going to be something important for me the rest of my life, and it was.
They're probably thinking this woman is literally perfect. If she can go from Bob Waterfield to, whomever, the last person you had named as a Rams quarterback. It's interesting you say that about
Jim Everett. Jim Everett was the last one on that list at that time.
You didn't call him Chris, did you?
I did not call him Chris Everett. That's a Jim Rome move, and that almost got his ass kicked. So
it was until
it was
Jim,
funny.
Who went to Purdue, which is where my son went, which is just up the road here from Indianapolis, which is where I'm from. Your comment about they don't care about the actors or this and that was funny because one of the guests I had a couple of years ago, he wrote an autobiography, was Larry Zonka.
Yeah, wow.
And the Dolphins are my favorite team and have been since Super Bowl VI, which they lost to the Cowboys 24-3.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him about being on Midway. He's in the movie Midway. I said, how did you not win an Oscar for that? And he was laughing about it. And he said, all the actors, all they wanted to talk about was football. Movie came out in 76, so he's a couple years away from the undefeated season and Super Bowl VIII, the repeat. But he says Henry Fonda and Wagner, all of them, they just want to talk about football and sports. He's like, well, I want to talk to them about acting. And he was like, no, we don't care about that. Tell us more about sports. So what you said makes perfect sense. And the fact that you came in, I'm not going to say hold your own because that's somewhat insulting, but could flourish in an atmosphere and an environment that clearly wasn't built for women's acknowledgement, recognition, and success.
Yeah, and I don't take that lightly. I worked very hard to earn the respect of the athletes I covered and the colleagues that I had that, if I'm at the anchor desk with Van Earl Wright or, many of these incredible people that I worked with or on Best Damn Sports Show with all of the athletes I worked with. Every day, I was the first person to get to work. I was the last person to leave the set. I wanted to know my business. When I covered the Dodgers, I was the first media person in the stadium in the morning when security opened up the media gate, and I was the last person to leave. And they would need to walk me out because it was nighttime and my car was the last one out there. I worked twice as hard as anybody. I worked weekends. I worked every single holiday. I worked late nights because I needed to learn. I needed to catch up. I needed to be as good as possible, not only as a performer on camera and being good at the work of being on camera, but I also needed to learn the history of the teams and the relationships between the different players and coaches and, who's got injuries and, whose contract is up. And so all of these things. So when people ask me why I didn't get married until later at life, my career was completely focused every hour of every day for years. I just wanted to get better and work harder and learn more. And I earned it. Most of the people that I worked with will tell you today, oh my God, Lisa Guerrero, like she is a workhorse. And that is something the LA Times one year did like a list of best ofs in the media and they said, hardest working person in sports, Lisa Guerrero. And I cut that out and I laminated it. And I still have that today because it wasn't hardest working woman in sports. It was hardest working person in sports. And they recognized that I covered all of the major sports there, plus UCLA hoops and USC football, and that I worked hard. So there's not, people go, well, of course she was successful. She was attractive. That is just an opportunity to get your foot in the door. Once you get in the door, you have to be good. You have to work hard. You have to take risks. You have to take a lot of shots. You got to be able to get up when they knock you down because you're going to get knocked down a lot. And over time, I was able to earn that credibility. There's a guy named Jack Perlman. You may have heard of him. Yeah, he's a great author, 10-time New York Times bestselling author. I had
Wasn't he
him
just on your podcast?
He was. He was just on my podcast. And he was saying the same thing. He's saying there's very few people that have lasted as long as I did in that business. And I'm still in the business, right? Over 30 years, going on 40 years in broadcasting. But it's because I just didn't give up. I just kept getting back up. Even when I would get humiliated or fired, or if I made a mistake, I would get up and I would learn from that. Sometimes it took me a while, but I kept coming back.
One thing that your book does very well, and we are talking with author Lisa Guerrero. Her book is Warrior, My Path to Being Brave. Now, when I was going to introduce you at the beginning, I was going to introduce you this way. This is from her book. My route to journalism has been unconventional. I was going to change all the pronouns, but the audience will get it. I've been a cheerleader, a corporate executive, a Barbie doll, a sportscaster, a soap opera vixen, a sideline reporter, a Playboy cover model, a diamond diva, a red carpet correspondent, an investigative journalist, a disruptor. I made Dennis Rodman cry. I interviewed 3 presidents and hundreds of professional athletes in dozens of locker rooms throughout the country. I co-starred in a viral video that has 1 billion views. I sued the New England Patriots and won. I tracked down a murderer. I butted heads with Barbara Walters. And I even played myself in a movie starring Brad Pitt. Now that is just, of course, the highlights and only some of the highlights. When you look back at your career, given the circumstances, not only of where the country was when you broke through, where journalism was, how you were raised, circumstance of your mother passing. One of my friends is a guy named Fred Klipsch. So if you've heard of Klipsch Speakers, he's the owner of Klipsch Speakers. But he grew up just a few blocks from where I grew up on the east side of Indianapolis. And after he had achieved amazing success, sold his company for nearly $200 million, I asked him one time, did you ever stop being that kid from the East Side? And he said, if I had stopped being that kid from the East Side, I never would have been successful. So, Lisa, if you had ever stopped being that young girl who was told by her mother what your name meant, warrior, would you have been successful?
No, I wouldn't have. And she gave me the greatest gift she could have. She was an immigrant from Chile. She couldn't speak English when she came to the United States. So she learned here at 16 how to speak English. And she was from the south side of Chicago. That's where she went to high school, and pretty rough place. And she met my dad, who was a social worker for the Salvation Army. And they together then began working for the Salvation Army in San Diego. And when she passed away, I was so angry, to lose my mother. I felt abandoned and I didn't know what it meant to be a warrior. I didn't know why she said that to me. I was shy. I was confused. But then as I got older, I slowly started to realize that she had given me this incredible gift of knowing who I am and knowing what to do with myself. It was a blueprint. You're a warrior. You were born to fight. And so I took that as a challenge later. And after overcoming these various obstacles that I write about in Warrior, I realized at the end of several decades, the other part of that gift, which was if you're a warrior willing to fight for others that need you because they're going through a trauma or a challenge, then this gifts you a much bigger opportunity to help more people. It's not just about helping myself to be brave and to get through these personal challenges or career challenges. Now I'm going to use what I learned to help other people. So the transition from sportscasting into investigative journalism was much more obvious to me and an easier transition than people would imagine. Because I don't think there's ever been an investigative reporter from the world of sports, certainly not women. But to me, it made so much sense, right? I was the victim of bullying, of harassment. So now, as an investigative journalist, I understand what it's like to be a victim or a survivor of bullying or harassment. And so now I've got the power and the platform to help those people find justice. And so, what my mother gave me, that feeling of insecurity, of being alone, of having to fight my own battles, of having to learn how to raise myself, those were all gifts to me. Those are things that helped me develop as a human being. And I'm grateful for those gifts.
And yet, reading your last chapters of your book, you talk about your empathy for the victims. But that seems to be and should be, because I work with investigative reporters here in this Indianapolis media market. Kara Kinney, if you're listening, she's an investigative reporter here and one of the best. And I texted her today with a picture of your book and said, you've got to buy this book. So I hope she does.
Thank you. Hi, Kara. You can call me.
I'll connect you through Rachel. Kara's won more awards than I can think because she just goes up and asks the question that needs to be asked. So it seems like you pair empathy for the victim, but I'm trying to think of a word other than vengeance. But does that fuel your drive to get up in someone's grill and say, why have you done this? Why aren't you paying the victims that you swindled? Why do you have a jet and you're an evangelist? How do those two things pair?
Yeah, that's a great question. And they do, because if you do have that empathy drive, as I do, and if you do have an innate sense of, I want to help people and I want to find justice for people, because things are unfair in the world. So many things are unfair. I am going to try to use my platform in any way to try to make things more equitable for this victim. But the first thing I do is interview the survivors of the crime or the scam. That's the first thing I do. I listen to them. I let them tell me their story. And right there, a lot of them say, this is the first time anybody's really listened to me. It's the first time anybody's believed me. And sometimes that's enough. Justice is different for everybody. For some survivors of crimes or scams or sexual assault, sometimes, justice for them is just having somebody listen to them and give them a platform to tell their own story and be believed. So what happens is I listen to all of these victims for all these crimes or scams or whatever it is, and I absorb their pain. I take it on. And some people say, you've got to be objective. You can't, you got to believe both sides. I believe there's right and wrong. Okay. So I am going to pick a side. And when I talk to victims of crimes or scams or somebody that's lost their child or their husband or their life savings or their home, I start to feel an empathy for them, a connection with them. And because I feel these feelings, this helps arm me with the ammunition I need, the facts and a microphone, to go after the person that they say hurt them or that ripped them off or that abused them. And so I do have a righteous anger. It is, I feel like I am working on behalf of these survivors to try to get the answers out of this person. And again, I'm not the judge and jury. I'm not going to arrest the person. I'm not going to put them in prison. I'm not going to physically have a fight with them. But for these victims, they want their stories told. They want to be heard, and they want to put that guy or that woman, whoever it is that hurt them, on the spot. They want a camera in their grill, they want a microphone in their face, and they want somebody to be brave enough to ask the question that they would ask if they could. And so that's my job, is to ask questions. I cannot control what that person does. He can hit me, he can run, he can lie. I've been hit with cars, I've had guns pulled on me, I've been called a liar, I've been called everything in the world. But that's not anything I can control. What I can control is being armed with the facts, being good on camera, and putting their feet to the fire, asking them the tough questions. That's what my victims deserve.
Looking back, if you knew what you know now, and you've probably gotten this question before, so please forgive me, would you have taken the gig with Monday Night Football as the sideline reporter?
Well, now, as I look back at how everything unfolded after that, I would say yes. But it took me a long time to get to yes, because it was the most painful and traumatic experience of my professional career. Other than losing my mother, it was the worst experience of my life. That 1 year and the ramifications of being fired for the next couple of years.
A couple of things, I have to admit, I felt sorry for, I have a daughter. She's 23. If anybody had talked to her the way that guy, I won't say his name, talked to you, I'd probably be in jail. But when you enter into something like that, we've all had aspects where we go, this job is the big break. Like, this is going to propel me. I've had it with my clients in my business. This is going to propel me to greater heights. This is what I've been waiting for. In one particular case, working for Mike Pence, it was a complete disaster. In your case, you must have been thinking, jumping up and down, oh my God, Monday Night Football, it's the biggest sports property in the history of television. It's going to make the rest of my life. And then what happened?
Yeah. So I was reluctant, to be honest, at first. When my agent said, Monday Night Football wants to interview you to be the sideline reporter, I had quit sports the year before because I'd had it with the misogyny of Fox Sports and Best Damn Sports Show, period. I quit. I got cast in a film in New Orleans opposite Boris Kodjoe, also interestingly set in the world of sports, but it was a film. So I'm in New Orleans and thinking, okay, I'm going to concentrate. I'm going to go back to acting. I'm going to go back to my acting roots. And then I get this call from my agent. And at first I said I didn't want to do it because I've never done sidelines before. I had been a sports anchor, a correspondent, sports reporter, done sit-down interviews, beat reporter, but I had never done sidelines, which is a very specific skill set. They had offered me college sidelines at Fox, which I turned down in order to stay on Best Damn Sports Show. So I said, no, I don't want to go to the interview. And my agent just about had a heart attack. He was furious. He's like, this is Monday Night Football. Of course you're going to fly to New York and do this interview. And I thought, you know what, he's right. It's Monday Night Football. And remember, back then, Monday Night Football was on ABC. This is before streaming, before Netflix. There was ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC. And ABC's Monday Night Football had 40 million viewers every Monday night. It was huge. It was an enormous platform. And I thought, maybe this is my destiny. So I went and I ended up getting the job. And I didn't realize how furious the media would be at me for being named the sideline reporter, because I didn't come from the world of ESPN or sports radio or being a sports columnist. They basically said she's a former cheerleader and somebody threw a microphone at her, ignoring the 10 years that I had built, at CBS Sports and Fox Sports
Right.
and on Best Damn and covering all these different teams. Instead, I was portrayed as a swimwear model. And so people hated me before I even had my first game. And my first 2 preseason games went great. Then we had our first regular season game, and I misspoke at the end of the game to Patrick Ramsey. I quickly fixed it in real time, but I had given my detractors what they wanted, which is that I made a mistake on live television. And so that was the headline, is that Lisa Guerrero doesn't know football, and she didn't know who she was interviewing, or she made a mistake. And I knew at that moment I was going to be fired. And that was my first regular season game.
You
And
knew
then
at that moment, forgive
I
me, at
knew,
that
yeah,
moment, you knew there
yes,
was no coming back.
yes, I knew it. I especially because there were these other factors. So the media hated me. I've got this very abusive executive producer who was verbally abusive to me. And I was in this massive spotlight. I was scared. I didn't know that job well. I was learning on the job. And I just thought they're not going to let me recover from this. And sure enough, every headline every week was, they're looking at my fingernail polish color. There was an entire column about how my fingernail polish was distracting to the game. Then it was, I was too pretty. Then it was, I used a notepad and it was referring to my notepad. And then if I didn't use my notepad, why isn't she referring to a notepad? And so it became sports radio, on and on and on. They were dissecting every single thing I did. And it was really shocking. And this is before social media. I can't even imagine.
You led me right where I was going. As bad as I
Holy
was
cow.
reading your book,
Yep.
and all I could think was, oh my God, if she had gone through this in 2023 instead of, was it 2003? Is that when you were
Yep.
there?
2003.
In 2023, that drive that you detail in the book, where you had your suicidal thoughts, would have ended, in my view, not that I know you, because I don't, much differently, because of just the viciousness and the fact that maybe 100,000 people read some rotten column about you in the New York Times, but millions and billions would have all been piling on you for that, where it seemed it was a no-win situation from the beginning. Was there a certain point where that notion hit you? It just doesn't matter how good I am.
Yes. So just over halfway through my season with Monday Night Football, things were so bad that I had lost a lot of weight. I was throwing up before and after the games, or anytime I would have to have an interaction with my executive producer. I was just wasting away. John Madden pulled me aside. He was so worried about me. He's like, you look thin. You've got like big circles under your eyes. You do not look well. And I wasn't well. I was extremely unwell. And I found out that I was pregnant. I was pregnant I had just gotten engaged. And I was probably, I think, 6 or 8 weeks along. And I was heading into a game where I was getting yelled at again by my executive producer before we'd even started. So I'm shaking. I go onto the field. I try to gather myself, get through the first half, but I felt like this pain in my stomach. It got worse and worse. And at halftime, I went into the officials' bathroom and I realized I was having a miscarriage. And instead of calling my producer or asking somebody to call 911 for me, I already knew I was going to get fired most likely, and I didn't want to give them an excuse to fire me during the season. So I went back on the field for the second half in a lot of pain and finished out the game. And then got home, and my husband took me right to my doctor. And, then we completed the DNC. I had to have, an
Sure.
abortion following the miscarriage. So it was painful physically, emotionally. And at that point, I'll never forget being in the plane after getting rid of the bloody clothes that were in the plane on my way home, knowing that my husband or my fiance at the time was going to pick me up and take me to the hospital. But I looked in the mirror and I was pale as a ghost. And I looked at myself and I said, they can't take anything away from me anymore. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to now lose this pregnancy. I knew that I was going to lose it because I had already started to bleed and I knew what was happening. And I'm probably going to get divorced and I'm not even married yet. I just felt like I was being destroyed and crushed. And it was at that point that I thought, well, when you have nothing left to lose, then they can't take anything else away from you. And so the last few games, I stopped listening to my executive producer. I popped the IFB out of my ears and I decided to speak in my own voice authentically, ask what I wanted to ask rather than running it by him or memorizing his stand-ups. I said what I wanted to say in my words. And by the last game, which was the Brett Favre game, where he threw 4 touchdowns in the first half, I had completely ignored my producer, and it was the finest game of my life. And of course, I get fired a month after that. But I'm really proud of my resilience from coming back from that. But really, honestly, when you've lost everything, or at least you think it at that point in your life, these are the things that are important to me, and I'm losing them. Then you just say, well, now I have to forge a path where I have to build everything back. And so that started that process, a 2-year process of rebranding myself, reimagining my life, and building my confidence back up.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Lisa Guerrero. She has won many, many awards, not just for journalism, but also for her contributions to society and her community. The book is titled Warrior, My Path to Being Brave. And I'll say this is not a woe is me book. It's a watch me book. And there's a big difference. And I think you're getting that through her answers to some of my questions. Do you have a favorite sports movie?
Moneyball, of course. Because I'm in it.
I walked into that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you sure did. But actually, Moneyball ended up being my favorite movie, not just because of the fact that it was an incredible film written by Aaron Sorkin with Brad Pitt, and it was a beautifully made film. And what was funny is I read Moneyball, and I couldn't imagine them being able to make a film out of it. Like, how are they going to do a story around this book, Moneyball? So I was excited to be a part of it, but the best part of all was that I met Aaron Sorkin. And what had happened is after Moneyball, I kept in touch with him. I wrote my book, Warrior, My Path to Being Brave. And I had told him right after we filmed, I said, I'm writing a book. And I'm sure how many times has he heard or has anybody heard, I'm writing a book, I'm writing a memoir. And he probably rolled his eyes and thought, sure, honey. Here we are a couple years later. And I say to him, I finished it. I wrote it. It's out. And he's like, wait, you wrote the book? And I said, yes. And he goes, I want to read it. I met him for lunch. I handed him Warrior. And within 24 hours, he texted me and he said, this is a film or a series. Let me help you. And so he's now guiding me through the development process of bringing Warrior to life on screen. So that movie ended up being much more important than just that one appearance in the movie, right? And this is, I can't stress this enough. And, I do keynote speeches all over the world. And one of my keynotes, one of the things I like to tell people, especially young people getting into any business, is that I cannot put enough emphasis on connections, networking, because that one day of work that I did on Moneyball, people still quote me back, hey, get out of my shot. or whatever the things are. I asked if you were 100%. So people, of course, that the performance I'm proud of, but more importantly, the connections that I made and the connections I make on all of my stories, all of my shows. Every network I've worked at, I come away with friends and business associates and connections that are so much more important than just that one day of work or that one single assignment or show. Network, make those phone calls, put yourself out there, email, connect on social. Because sooner or later, people are going to help you. You'll find the right person that can get you to that next platform that you need to be on.
I'm very lucky in that I have an astoundingly beautiful girlfriend. And as I was reading your book, she was watching Modern Family with me for the first time. I don't know if you've ever watched that show, but do you feel any kinship towards or with Gloria? Or, and then,
What's funny, first of all, Sofia Vergara, wow. Wow. I mean, what a stunning woman. But she's taken this, what she looks like, because she was a model and, she really took that look and that shtick and that, hot Latina thing. And she branded herself. She made it. She leaned into it. She's hilarious. And, now she has a production company. She's really done everything that she possibly can with what she was given. And I really admire that. There are very few Latina leads on television. And still, even though we're the fastest growing minority in this country, we're underrepresented in film and television, which is one of the reasons why I want Warrior to be made, is that it would be wonderful to have my story, which is centered around that Latina, to be part of the mainstream film or television. But I admire anybody in this business who is able to take a good hard look in the mirror and a look at themselves and say, here's what my skill set is, here's what people think about me, here's what I know I can do, and combine these things and make the most of them. So, and I'm a big supporter of other women. I'm a girl's girl, so I'm always rooting for other women.
we have a few minutes left with Lisa Guerrero, author of Warrior, My Path to Being Brave. What's the big FU? And why is this FU bigger than the other FUs?
So in my book, we wanted to illustrate my career by showing that there were these villains, right, throughout
Right.
the careers and these obstacles that I overcame. And one of them, as I mentioned, was this, producer that I had. And for me, being able to, at the end of the book and at the end of that part of my career, be able to say to somebody that had hurt me or marginalized me, you're not the boss of me anymore. I'm the boss of me. You don't get to yell at me anymore. You don't get to determine the course of my career anymore. I now get to take that responsibility on myself. And so I think the biggest FU you can give to anybody is to say, your presence in my life no longer matters. That's as hurtful a thing that you can say to somebody who used to be in a power position over you that you possibly can. Just being able to wipe your hands free of this person or entity or company, whatever it is, and move forward on your own terms is the biggest FU there is. And I don't say that, I do a whole keynote. One of my keynotes is called The Power of Rage. The power of rage isn't a negative thing. If you're not feeling anger right now about things that are going on in our country, our society, then you're not paying attention. But what do we do with that rage? I certainly don't condone violence or doing anything that's going to hurt anybody, but we can take that frustration and we can harness it. We can channel it into a positive place, into a place of power. You can take your pain and turn it into power. And so I talk about that a lot. Confrontation, which is what I did for a living on Inside Edition for 18 years, I
Right.
confronted people. Confrontation is not a negative thing. You can confront somebody that's hurting you or hurting somebody that you care about or hurting a perfect stranger. We can stand up for ourselves and for others, but that takes bravery. That takes guts. That takes leaning into your inner warrior and letting it go, letting it out.
The reason I mentioned the big FU is that's a chapter in Lisa's book that I think everyone would enjoy. It's tongue in cheek about the subject matter. That's all I'll say. We have reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Lisa, are you ready?
I'm ready.
What was your first job?
My first job was my first real job where I got a paycheck and not just like babysitting money,
Sure.
was working at Disneyland. And I sold balloons in Tomorrowland. And I lived in Orange County. And so all these kids from my high school that had money would come and make fun of me because I wore this really goofy costume. And it was humiliating. It was so humiliating. But at the same time, I got that paycheck and I was able to buy my first car on that money. I was very proud of myself.
With
Disneyland. Woo!
with the braces and the glasses.
Oh, yeah. I was a
uh,
mess.
the
Mess.
picture in
Hot
your
mess.
book. What was your first concert?
Clash. The Clash.
Oh,
The Clash in Long Beach. Yeah, I'm a huge, I love The Clash. I love punk. I love alternative music. I love new wave back in the 80s. And so when I got to see The Clash with my high school boyfriend, I was thrilled. I was thrilled. We thought we were really edgy little punks.
Radio Clash is my favorite song by The
Oh,
Clash.
so good. So good. Yeah.
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Warrior, My Path to Being Brave by Lisa Guerrero. Other than that, gosh, there's some To Kill a Mockingbird is my all-time favorite novel. And the reason I say that is because a lot of my feelings about social justice, I think, were formed back then. And I connected with the little girl who was being raised by her dad, who was her hero, who fought for social justice, as my dad did as a social worker. So I feel a lot of connections there with that book.
I've produced about 370 podcasts. I think you're at number 370, and that is by far the novel that is mentioned the most as an answer to that
Really?
question. Yes. Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
I would say when women got the vote, I think I would have been a suffragist. I think I would have been out there in the streets. I think I would have been marching for the opportunity to have my voice heard as a citizen. And so I can only imagine what it must have been like to have the realization after decades of work to see that your voice is being heard. I'm sure there are other things I could think of, but for whatever reason, right now, I think, as we're celebrating America's 250th anniversary and our happy birthday and our freedoms, I don't think we could have any freedoms if we don't have the freedom to vote and to have our voices being heard.
5th question, if you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record just to chat, whom would you choose?
Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama. I think, first, for so many reasons. Obviously, she's a much admired woman. She's been in the rooms where history was made as her, husband was the first Black president of the United States. But also she herself is so intelligent and educated and, how she's been able to navigate the fear that I'm sure she had for her family and their safety, and probably still does. And, she and her husband now have a production company. They were young when they left the White House, so they still have their whole life ahead of them. I would love to know what her next moves are. Is she, people say, "Oh, she'll never run, she'll never do this, she'll never do that," but I would love to hear it from her. Just being an investigative reporter, I have a lot of questions. I have many questions. So for me, like when you say I get 2 hours to sit down with somebody, I would also love to sit down with Trump. I have questions. I have so many questions. So I'm one of these people that, you can't tell me that, oh, you shouldn't talk to that person or you shouldn't go here. I want to talk to people. I want to learn. I want to ask questions.
I will say, first off, you should have her on your podcast, which I'm sure you can make happen. And
I would
secondly,
love that.
the most popular answer to that question is Barack Obama.
I thought about that. And then I thought, yes, of course. Like, who wouldn't want to talk to him? But I thought, I think Michelle is the future. I think something's going to happen with her very special, very special.
I'd like to ask you one very quick question because I know we're on a time deadline. I live in Indianapolis. We have an athlete in this city. Her name is Caitlin Clark.
Mm.
What do you think about her career and sort of the treatment, the controversies, especially on social media about what she means to the WNBA and women's sports?
Well, she's incredibly gifted, incredibly important to the league and to little girls that see themselves reflected in her. She's got passion and energy. I think some of the criticism has been unfair, but also she's brought a lot of that on herself. And, when you look at any athlete, and I've interviewed thousands of athletes, y- y- your gifts, your God given ability is going to get you to this place, get you championships and get you paid. And, suddenly you're famous and you're a household name. What you do with that, how you honor the fact that now people care about what you're saying, what you're doing on social media, who you choose to platform with your fame, that's hard to navigate. I would say that if she wants to be, I'm sure if she wants to have the legacy that most people do, which is an iconic legacy that is well loved and everybody loves and adores you and respects you, then you really have to be careful about, whether or not your messaging is being received in the way you want to send it. And I don't think right now her messaging is strong.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. We are a federally certified, veteran-owned small business and registered with the state of Indiana and the city of Indianapolis. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest, Lisa Guerrero, author of Warrior, My Path to Being Brave. And here's what I'll say. Along with all her other gifts, sense of humor, everything, this journalist, this person has smarts and she has stones. And I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much, Robert. What a gift. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.